Hello and welcome back to my channel, Bikinis and Boarding School. I'm your host, Jill Humphrey, and this is my second episode. In today's episode, I am going to be touching on my relationship with food and how boarding school potentially impacted that, both in negative ways and positive ways, and the potential of boarding school and restrictions that we experienced at this school, and the potential for maybe some less than healthy relationships with food later on in life. So for those of you that might find discussions about macros, calories, dieting, and nutrition triggering and not supportive to your journey, now's your chance to tap out. But for those of you who are fascinated, let's get into it. So in my first episode, I talked a little bit about what it was like to get sent away to a boarding/reform school at the age of 15. I was absolutely nervous as all get out to do that first episode, but the outpouring of encouragement and support that I got after that first episode really encouraged me to jump into the next one and continue on with this process. So thank you to all of you who left messages and reached out. So I'm going to read for you the description of what this school was. The Holy Highway operated a non-denominational home for troubled girls between the ages of 13 and 17. The home provides, in addition to housing, religious and educational services for its students. It's controlled and accountable to the Texas state agencies that regulate such homes. The organization is a non-denominational home for troubled girls between 13 and 17 under nonprofit types. It lists substance abuse and human service organizations. So I will just say that the part about substance abuse is an absolute joke, that they would put that on the label of what they specialize in, because unless you consider cold turkey with a side of Jesus a treatment plan, there was no treatment to be had in this place. I actually remember the screams of one of the girls that came in for the first few nights she was there and was told by the dorm mother to just ignore them, that she was going through the process of detoxing, and that should serve as a reminder to us to never do drugs. So let's talk about food and what it was like at boarding school. So just like everything else, it was very controlled, very restricted, and there were a lot of rules around it. We had a menu that was written for us for all three meals, and it was usually written about a month in advance. So once a week, we would do our menu planning for the week, and we would go as a dorm to a building on the property that was called the food shed, and we would load up with the ingredients that we needed to prepare our meals for a week. Let's see. So when I first got there was not a lot of control around portion sizes. So if pancakes was on the menu, we could make big, gigantic pancakes and absolutely eat our fill. If biscuits were on the menu, those biscuits could pretty much be any size. But girls started gaining weight, or that's kind of what the staff said. So they started restricting the portion sizes. So it would be very specific. Like if you had a pancake, it was half a cup of pancake batter. If you had a biscuit, it would specify the amount of dough that was supposed to be used in it. Everything else was measured and portioned as well. So for example, if we were having cereal, it would specify 1 measured cup of cereal plus 8 ounces of milk. There was not any extra. And I don't know about you, but 1 cup of cereal as an adult is not really enough to keep me full for a serving. And I know as a kid, it definitely was not. So we'll talk about somehow these triggers hit you later in life. And in my last contest prep, I was actually measuring out the food that I needed to bring with me for show day, and was weighing out 40 grams of Rice Chex cereal into a plastic bag. And I had this flashback hit me of what it was like as a young teen to look at this little portion of cereal with this little tiny glass of milk with it and know that that was all the food you were going to get for the next 4 or 5 or potentially 6 hours, depending on the day. And I got super emotional over it. I felt compassion and empathy for that kid who was hungry far too frequently back then. And just looking at it and knowing that wasn't okay. It wasn't okay then, and it's okay now as an adult to look back and acknowledge that it wasn't okay what I went through. The cereal thing is also interesting because maybe it wouldn't have triggered so hard if it was just a once a week breakfast thing. um, But the cereal breakfast was part of hard labor. So I had mentioned hard labor in my last episode. Hard labor was the preferred form of punishment in boarding school. You could get hard labor for any number of things. Sometimes it was an immediate offense that would land you on hard labor, or other times it would be an accumulation of demerits over the course of a week or so. When you were on hard labor, you were to report at 7 a.m. and at 7, breakfast wasn't served yet. So rather than have the normal breakfast with the rest of the girls that you shared a dorm with, you would have the cereal breakfast, which was 1 measured cup of cereal with 8 ounces of milk. You would go out and report for hard labor, and you would work until midday, where you would have a lunch break. On your lunch break, they would give you 2 pieces of bread with a smear of peanut butter on it, just a plain peanut butter and bread sandwich with water. Then you would work again until 7 p.m., after which you would be allowed to go back to the dorms. This was usually just after dinner. So your dinner would be sitting with a napkin over it, either on the counter or on the table. And you would eat by yourself, because another part of hard labor was talk isolation. You were not allowed to talk or interact with not only the girls, but the staff members either. So it was a very lonely period of time. But knowing what I know about nutrition, food, macros, calories, all of that, I'm looking at that pitifully poor portion of food for an entire day, combined with a lot of intense manual labor and just those feelings of hunger that would hit when you were on hard labor. And I think the feelings of hunger and the food restriction around it really added a level of severity to the punishment itself. So back to the food being very controlled. So there were actually locks on the pantries. There was no food kept anywhere where you could get to it. I believe some of the refrigerators and freezers might have even had locks on them too. So you were never allowed to have extra snacks, extra food. There was no consideration taken for different nutritional needs, depending on someone's age, their body type, or just their own hunger levels. So we had very little fresh fruits and vegetables. Everything was canned or frozen or processed. While we did have a garden and experience the benefits of having some fresh vegetables for part of the year, that was truly the exception. And the majority of the year, it was not very fresh. I talked about the portion control. That was really interesting. So about the same time they implemented portion control at the farm to help monitor the girls that were gaining weight, they also encouraged morning walking. So they would have us get up pretty early. I remember it still being dark out, and head out to the track, and we would walk laps in the morning. I actually got put on restriction from morning walking at one point because they were convinced that I had an eating disorder and an obsession with exercise. Honestly, that statement right there is an entire episode. So we will dig into that another time, because that's honestly a little bit more about exercise than it is about nutrition. But nonetheless, it was, I can look back and see a lot of weird, disordered eating patterns that started at that point. So, for example, with hard labor and the food aspect of it and the restriction around food that was coupled with your punishment, almost created this belief system on some level that food needed to be earned. And if you misbehaved, that you were not deserving of basic food and nourishment. And some of us coming in with these perfectionist tendencies, who tended to be very hard on ourselves, would get punishment and discipline, and then have that reinforced with this concept of we were not deserving of having a full belly or being satisfied after a meal, or maybe we weren't even deserving to sit at the table or talk with people, that we were somehow less than because our performance wasn't perfect. So it'll be interesting to hear from some of you. Reach out to me, leave a comment, but are there any weird food restrictions or issues that you might feel that might have stemmed from hard labor, because I can definitely feel some of these as I look back to it. Let's see, we made most of our food, so there wasn't a lot of treats to be had. We had to earn our treats through merit sales. So just like you would get demerits for not performing your chores correctly, or bad grades, or maybe a sign of disrespect to one of the dorm mothers, you would get merits for good behavior. And those merits could be exchanged for any number of things at the merit sales, like toothpaste, toothbrushes, hair ties, shampoo, conditioner, soap, all your basic necessities that even if your parents sent them to you, you would still have to buy them at the merit sale. But you could spend some of your merits on a candy bar and a Coke. So this was like a way to get a treat that wasn't your basic meal on the menu plan. With your merits, you could also get merit outings. So one of the highest level merit outings that you could purchase with your points was a Sister Janice outing. And Sister Janice was the administrator, kind of the head person there. She was our principal, so to speak, and you could get an outing with her where she would take you to lunch. And I remember when I got my Sister Janice outing, getting asked where I wanted to go for lunch, and I actually just wanted to get the ingredients to make turkey sandwiches back at the farm. I remember getting vegetables, and I really wanted cucumbers and tomatoes, and specifically sprouts. I loved sprouts as a kid, and I still like them today on my sandwiches. And she thought it was really interesting that I didn't want to go out to a restaurant. But when you think about food, and food being comfort for us in many ways from the time we're a baby, and then developing part of our family identity around meal times and the foods we eat, and some of the cultural attachments that we have to certain foods, food becomes a bit of a support system to us, and it is comforting in some ways, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So as I was writing these notes for this episode and kind of going through it, I thought back to this weird request that I had of just making sandwiches for my outing and not wanting to go to a restaurant or get anything special. And when I dig down into what that actually meant to me, I probably didn't understand it at the time, but as an adult looking back, I can see I was really craving the comfort food of home. And for me, that was fresher food, or something just as basic as a turkey sandwich, being able to load up a sandwich with all the toppings and vegetables that you want on it. On some level, it's heartbreaking. I can see us all as kids that were there, that were terribly homesick, missing that feel of just normal life, and trying to create these little pockets or opportunities where we could connect and feel normal, because honestly, nothing felt normal at that time. So I'm curious if any of you had any outings, and if you did, maybe what you requested on those. Was it something that was familiar and comforting to you as a kid? Something that you experienced at home, or was it just something that you'd been craving for a while? So another note that I put for this episode was about Wednesday night church. So we would leave the farm probably 5:30, 6-ish, if I had to guess a time, and drive the distance that we drove to get to church. They were really long services. So on the way back, we were hungry and we would get a snack, and the snack was never big enough. I swear, it was almost to the point where you didn't want to eat it, because you knew that a couple bites just wasn't going to satisfy you. And for the longest stretch, we had these Snackwell treats that were essentially diet packaged cookies. They were low cal, and who knows whatever else they had going for them as far as what they were being sold for, but they were glorified diet food. And I remember getting a couple cookies at a time, and they never digested or sat well with me. Other times we would get a couple of Oreos, or maybe a couple of Nutter Butter cookies. And to this day, I don't think I could eat a Nutter Butter cookie. Just the smell of them alone turns my stomach. So we had these Nutter Butter cookies for a while. And that seemed to be the go-to snack. And I remember giving them away on the bus because I really didn't want these cookies, but a girl shrieking and finding maggots in hers and a couple other people finding maggots. The cookies were bad and absolutely infested. And just the combo of the smell of these peanut butter cookies on a bus and the maggots turned me off of those completely forever. So I do believe there is an impact on our relationship with food in our adult lives because of what we experienced at this school. It was actually weird digging around online and not being able to find really anyone that specialized in the impact of institutions and being institutionalized as a child or as a teen and its potential lasting impact on one's relationship with food, or even the possibility of it leading to patterns of disordered eating in someone's adult life. So one of the things that I can really see is kind of, as I touched on, food as a coping mechanism for many of us. And in a time where we were deprived of almost every coping mechanism that we had, we were deprived of being able to use food as a coping mechanism because we had no access to it. We had no control over it. We didn't get to choose our own meals. Again, it was just very restricted. The forced food choices take away one's feeling of independence, choice, and possibly create a stronger food focus in life. So I remember specifically flipping through recipe books and copying recipes, and the same way that a kid might read a book and mentally fantasize and escape and picture that they're in another place, playing the role of a different character in my mind and the mind of some of my friends who we would write and exchange recipes with each other. We were planning this part of food freedom to be able to behave like a normal person around food again. And I remember writing those recipes and imagining myself mixing the ingredients, baking them. I could smell the smells, but most of all, just to be able to prepare something and eat without the limitation of a portion control, which is kind of weird now that I'm a bodybuilder and I really spend a lot of my life practicing portion control. But now it's because it's my choice, not because it's a choice that was forced or imposed on me by someone else. So I do have some questions. If this actually might have encouraged some binging tendencies and or food hoarding. I wonder if it might have encouraged overindulging our own children once we grew up and had kids of our own. I also wonder about the mental impact of having food locked up and access restricted. And I also wonder about the idolization of sugar and the merit system required to purchase it. All right, so not all of the aspects around food at boarding school were negative. I always try to highlight some of the positives as well, because honestly, this was a really dark experience and it did cause a lot of trauma. And there's still a lot of that I'm unpacking to this day. And if you went to this school, I'm sure that you probably are too. But sometimes it helps to find the silver lining. And I'm not talking about playing Pollyanna here and trying to spin everything into a positive. But at the end of the day, it wasn't all negative. And there were some positive things that I did kind of carry with me into my adult life. And I will credit this school for bringing some positive as well. So some of the pros, I did learn how to cook from scratch, just about everything. It introduced me to a new style of cooking that I was not used to, being from the Seattle area. So I learned about black-eyed peas. I learned about red beans and rice. I learned about okra. I learned about chicken fried chicken and chicken fried steak. I learned how to cook really good cornbread, peach cobbler, and all other kinds of amazing Southern dishes. I learned some skills to help meal prep, plan, and shop on a budget. You know, as I look back, the food budget was probably pretty small. So we really learned how to stretch things. I have a note here that one of the girls' dads brought crawfish from Louisiana. So that was a cool treat one time doing that. And of course, I have talked about the garden in the past, but there were just some fun parts about being involved in the growing or the raising of the animals and the preparation of the food. I do remember hunting for wild garlic in the front field and learning how to use your nose and follow the smell, what to look for, and then digging out the garlic. So those are definitely some fun things. The cons probably outweigh the pros. Um, so, and I don't even feel qualified to dig into that. All I can do is speak from my own experience and say that if any of you are struggling with disordered eating habits in your adult life, it might actually stem from this if you had an experience like I did. So I will be super curious to hear maybe some of the ways that the food restriction and the rules that we experienced at the farm might have helped shape your relationship with food into your adult life. So in the first episode, I touched on a psychological phenomenon known as boarding school syndrome. It was a term coined by Dr. Joy Shavarian in her 2015 book titled The Boarding School Syndrome. I'm going to cover a couple more aspects of boarding school syndrome today. And the first one is abuse, bullying, and rituals. So boarding school is a 24/7 experience with nowhere to run. It's often a place where bullying is normalized. A melting pot of emotions exists at boarding school, but a stiff upper lip mentality means that many feelings aren't deemed accessible or discussed. There's literally no help. Just telling tales makes everything worse. We had a really strict rule at this school that we didn't talk about our past. If you had something of a personal nature that you wanted to talk about, you needed to write it on a slip of paper, fold it into a note, and drop it into a little gift bag that was sitting on top of the piano in chapel. The administrator would look through those notes and decide who would be granted an audience to discuss that with her. You may or may not even get to talk to her. Bullying isn't confined to pupils. Some teachers are bullies too, acting callously and cruelly towards students and even staff they take a dislike to. I can say that I saw this happen firsthand. It was pretty apparent that dorm moms and staff kind of had their favorites, and then they also had their problem children. And if you were on the problem child list, they paid closer attention to you. They would be a lot stricter with you. Your punishments would be a lot swifter. And I just felt like you were under a lot more scrutiny. They would give out demerits a lot faster. And if you were close to enough demerits to get hard labor, I feel like they were just kind of looking for that extra thing that would just push you over the edge to get you hard labor. Of course, bullying happens in non-boarding schools, but a key difference for boarders is the relentlessness. There's nowhere to run and no parents or siblings around to step in. There is no support and no love. Children struggle to understand why their parents have sent them to hell. Sexual abuse in boarding schools is also rife. With no parents to pick up on signs that abuse is taking place, abusers feel enabled in the boarding school environment. Children can also misconceive and welcome the attention they feel as they feel abandoned by their parents. One individual describes their experience at boarding school as remorseless and inescapable. As a child with a stammer, bad at sports, and strong opinions, this individual said they would have been bullied at any school, but as a boarder, they said it sometimes lasted through the night. Paris Hilton has recently spoken out of her experience at boarding school for the troubled teenagers in Utah. Speaking to Newsweek, she said, that experience and physical and emotional and sexual abuse I suffered led to years of trauma-induced insomnia and complex PTSD that I still and countless other survivors of the institutional child abuse have struggled with for years. Sometimes it's hearing another person call it for what it is that helps us connect to our own trauma. So in this episode, I am sharing some of my own experiences around food and my own disordered eating patterns as a way to maybe help normalize the feelings that we might still carry with us today for those of us who experience the weird and crazy environment that we came up in as teens at Holy Highway. Another aspect of boarding school syndrome is known as disassociation as a survival technique. Disassociation is a break in how the mind handles information. A person can disassociate from thoughts, feelings, memories, surroundings, or even identity. Disassociating from emotional turmoil is a survival technique that is common in boarders. Steinberg and Shaw, 2001, defined disassociation as an adaptive defense in response to high stress or trauma, characterized by memory loss and a sense of disconnection from oneself or one's surroundings. It is this mechanism that helps boarding school children cope with their traumatic and stressful situations. I can definitely see some disassociation that went on for us in boarding school and then again after. I think religion played a big role in this and how we were instructed to handle our emotions by just giving them to God. We were instructed to not talk about our past. If anything was upsetting or emotional to us, we again were instructed to just go to God with those and not talk about them. The ability to not speak when you're going through something is detrimental in so many ways, especially when those are behaviors that are ingrained in you during such formative years. I think about the talk isolation that was imposed on us when we were on hard labor. I think about the talk isolation that we had when we first came into the program. I thought about the rules that we had around what we were allowed to say and what we were not allowed to say, who we were allowed to talk to and interact with, and the way that we had to hide the close friendships and bonds that we were forming out of fear of being restricted from that person. This can create a lot of mistrust in your adult years. It can create some blockages and some difficulty around maintaining friendships and even close relationships. It can create feelings of abandonment and the loss of trust in yourself, the loss and trust of yourself to be able to manage getting close to someone. So I just want to recognize some of those things and the disassociation that might come from the experiences that we had on that farm. So I'm going to get into one of the reviews. So the Yelp reviews on this place, I kind of wish there were more. So if you haven't left a Yelp review and have one to leave, go leave a review for this place because some of these, while tragic, are also a little bit funny. So in that last episode, or the first episode that I did about my boarding school journey, I read one of the Yelp reviews, and in it, the writer talked about one of her classmates who was bitten by a spider and was not given the medical attention she needs while they were waiting for God to heal her injury. So I actually found a post that was a reply to this first review, and it was by the girl that was bitten by the spider. She writes, I am 35 now, and the regular nightmares that I'm stuck there only recently stopped after years of therapy. The dorm moms, or whatever they were called, were extremely abusive and manipulative. They told lies about our behavior, so we'd receive punishment that we didn't deserve. I'm looking at you, Donna. I hope you've lived the life you deserve. At one point, we apparently got too much toilet paper, so we had to ask for some before we used the restroom. They gave us one square. Aurora's review mentioned the girl who got bit by a spider. That was me. It was a brown recluse. I have a dime-sized scar on my thigh where the 1-inch deep hole was. They said I was faking it for attention and refused to treat it. I'm sure it's not shocking that I have no religious beliefs now, but if there is a God, I doubt he'd ever have any grace for anyone who ran that place. These were some of the least Christ-like people I ever met. My sociopathic, villainous sister, who was at the Picton facility, absolutely thrived there and bonded with Sister Pam and everyone else so well that she considered working there. That should give you some indication of what these people were like. So it's interesting that she would bring up the story about being accused of faking a spider bite for attention. I too was accused of faking something to get out of chapel. So when I was a young teen, I suffered from migraines, and I had one of these migraines hit me on a Wednesday night and told the dorm mother that I was really struggling and I had a migraine. And first, I was told that I was faking it to get out of chapel, but that really wasn't in my character or my nature to fake something to get out of chapel. So they decided that maybe I was actually telling the truth. But if that was the case, then I was for sure under some sort of spiritual attack. And it was actually Satan trying to get a hold of my brain and keep me from a relationship with God. So now we're heaping a nice little dose of religious trauma on top of everything. I was forced to go to chapel even through this horrible migraine. And I remember laying on the back pew of church with my head just absolutely pounding and the sound of these tambourines as people marched around shaking their tambourines, which was very common in chapel, fighting the nausea and just barely making it through. But while I was laying there praying so hard that God would take away this migraine and struggling with this feeling that maybe my faith wasn't strong enough to keep the migraine away. Maybe I had done something to deserve this pain. It's just a weird thing for a kid to process, to feel like somehow they're responsible in some way for this physical pain that's happening to them. So, another story I'm going to tell in closing about food and my time at Holy Highway also draws in an element of religious trauma. Um, it also has ties to my bodybuilding and how easy it is for me to diet these days based on some of what I've experienced in the past. But this is specifically around fasting. So at this school, we were encouraged to fast. And I don't remember if it was 24 hours, if it was 2 days, 3 days, exactly what it was. But for those of us that felt called to fast, we would spend our meal times in our rooms praying or reading our Bible rather than sitting at the table and having the meal with our classmates. If we wanted, we were provided with a glass of juice or V8. So we at least had something, but it was only liquid. I know that it was presented to us that we were somehow good or holy, or I don't even know, but it was glorified in some way that we should make this decision. So after this fast, the very next day, we were taken out to brunch at an all you can eat brunch place in Texarkana called Shoney's. So picture Southern style brunch. We had everything from French toast to waffles, biscuits, gravy. We had eggs, we had toast, we had all the fresh berries and fruit. We had whipped cream toppings, we had bacon and sausages. And imagine as a teenager having not eaten in at least 24 hours, possibly more, and seeing this big buffet in front of you. So we were not given any instructions before going to the buffet. We go through and load up our plates and go sit down. It just seemed like such a fun, nice, normal outing. We got back to the farm, and as we were getting off the vans, staff members started pulling some of us aside into a different group. And when the group of us was gathered together, they informed us that we were immediately on hard labor, that we had piled too much food on our plates, that we were gluttons, that gluttony was a sin, and we were sent off to hard labor. I remember being absolutely devastated over this because I had never had hard labor up until that point. I had really tried to toe the line to be perfect in every way. It was my goal to get out of there as fast as possible with no demerits and no hard labor. And here I was on hard labor. And for something as silly as loading your plate too full as a teenage kid, not even having been instructed to not load too much food on your plate. So you can see how some of these scenarios like this might contribute to a strained relationship with food later on in life. I remember having to fill up 5-gallon buckets and carry them a good half a mile from one end of the property to the other and dump our bucket of dirt into a big pit on the back end of the property and then walk back and just repeat that over and over and over again. You're not allowed to talk while you're on hard labor, but we would pass each other and make little comments or sing little songs. And as horrible as the experience was, I know that it was making eye contact or having these little inside jokes with friends that gave us the strength to make it through our days like that. In my case, I was pretty lucky the first go around and did not have much hard labor, but I do remember girls that were out there all the time, looking out the window of the school and seeing some of them for weeks, if not months on end, every single day out there on their hard labor. If nothing else, my first experience with hard labor gave me true empathy for them and sympathy for what they were going through. So I think that's probably going to wrap up episode number 2 about food and how the institutional aspect of boarding school might have played a role in future patterns of disordered eating. This punishment reward type mentality that goes around food, that if you behave and if you do everything right, if you're perfect, then you deserve to eat like a normal human being, to sit with others at a table and carry on a conversation. But if you're less than perfect, if you don't do things right, then you don't even deserve to be treated like a human. You need to sit on the ground outside, eat prisoner food, not talk to people, and get looked at like you're somehow less than everyone else. I'm not quite sure how to come back from that and how to heal from it, but I do know that in finding my voice and speaking about some of these things that happened, I've actually come a lot closer to healing than I think I ever have. I'm really appreciative to those of you who have taken the time to listen to my journey and share some of these stories with me. I love it when you like, when you comment, when you subscribe. That engagement really makes me feel good and validates that I'm on the right track here in at least starting these discussions and talking about what we went through and giving the victims, the girls of Holy Highway, a platform to share their stories. So in my next episode, I'm actually going to start interviewing some of the girls that I went to school with. I'm really excited to get to these episodes because in all honesty, it's kind of awkward just sitting here, just me behind the camera talking and sharing my story. I think it'll be a little smoother and a little easier when I'm actually talking to another individual, asking the interview questions. And I'm really excited for some of the things that are going to come out, maybe memories that I had long forgotten about that they might bring up for me, and to just be able to connect with people in a way that I was not able to when we were classmates at school because talk was so restricted. So to take all these rules off and be able to speak freely with some of these women and share their story and talk about the impact this school might have had on them is just really exciting for me. So thank you so much for watching.